On empires, further thoughts. Previously, I've discussed a fundamental difference between continental empires, such as the French, and Anglosphere empires, particularly the British, in terms of the fact that continental empires unite culture, the cultural aspects of being French wherever you are in the French Empire, and the social, that is the governmental, economic aspects. And by bringing them together, they make the French Empire particularly strong, but also particularly difficult to dissolve, as we saw with Algeria and elsewhere. The British Empire is based on a unity in the past of the Pax Britannica, the adherence to British law, the use of British governmental forms, British economic structures, including paying taxes and private property, and the rest outside that was up to the individuals. So you could have your own religion, your own food, your own customs, your own culture. That was up to you within reason. And that made it much easier for the British Empire to relinquish bits of it. Thinking further about this, another way of putting it, the same sort of thing, is that the continental empires are based on what Sir Henry Maine calls status, that is, on birth and blood. Obviously, someone in Vietnam or Morocco or wherever is not actually born with French blood, but the creation of the empire was based on the idea that by becoming part of the French Empire, they would change their status, as in becoming married to someone. You change your status and you become part of them. And so you become, putting it in another way, a part of the French family. You become a son, a daughter, a nephew, a niece. You are part of France in a very deep family-like bond, and France, compared to the Anglosphere, is much more familistic, and the family is more important. So the French, Spanish, Portuguese, and other empires were family empires based on status and birth, and once you were within them, that was it. Putting it another way, they were like a body in which France was the head, and heart perhaps, but these other parts of the empires were the necessary arms and legs and back, and to get rid of them, to withdraw from the body, was like cutting off your hand or your fingers or your foot, and so it was very painful and a rejection. The British Empire was based on the idea of a contract, the opposite of status. In other words, although in a way the people who were conquered, wherever it was, in India or Burma, or less so where the White Empire just came and exterminated more or less whoever was there, but the idea was that there was some sort of agreement to be part of the empire. You entered into it as a child does, it implicitly into a contract without really knowing what it's doing. But once it grows up, and this was the large element of the British Empire, once the child reaches adulthood, it can reject the contract. It can say, I no longer want to be part of your empire. Please let me go off. And for quite a long time, particularly towards the end of the British Empire, there were many statements of the fact that, of course, one day the people in different parts of the empire would be allowed to make their own choice about their adult behaviour, just as a child is. At the moment, they were in Britain was in loco parentis, in the shape of a father or mother, but later they could go off again. And the same was true, for example, in relation to Scotland or Ireland or Wales. They were absorbed into the British Empire, but when the Scots said recently that they wanted to be independent of England, much to the astonishment of many people, rather than behaving as the Spanish do with Catalonia, for example, it's just a terribly contentious, hurtful, wound-filled subject. In Britain, people said, well, we'd be sorry to see you leave, but it's, your choice, you're adults, you decide what you have to do. And so the British Empire was associational, contractual, a club, and after it was formally dissolved in certain ways, it remained associational, contractual, a club in the form of the British Commonwealth. And so you could remain in that way, in a way that hasn't occurred at all in the continental empires. Once you left, you'd left the family. So in the British case, it wasn't a matter of cutting off your hand or arm. It was just a set of people with whom you'd played a game, putting another British metaphor. They were part of your team, but if they wanted to go and join another team or be independent, that's their free choice. So the French and continental empires were structural. France was relationally intertwined with its empire, whereas the British was individualistic. Each part was autonomous, associated for certain purposes for a certain time, and then separated. Now all of that explains a lot to me about how the world works and disintegrates and reintegrates, and it also raises the question of other empires, which I won't go into except in relation to China, because I think it helps me to understand the reactions of China currently to two of the big talking points. One is Hong Kong and one is Taiwan, and to a certain extent the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Now, Westerners, Anglo-Saxon people, can't understand. They think, well, if Taiwan wants to be independent, as Scotland wanted to be independent, what's wrong with that? I mean, they can be friends with China, they can be next door. Now, obviously, the Chinese are aware that even if there weren't other reasons, to have a large island only a few kilometers off the coast, which is already bristling with American weapons and could be a base for American troops and so on, might not be really a great idea, just as it would be the case if the Chinese occupied part of Mexico or the Canadian border. But apart from the political dangers and difficulties of it, there's also a fact that I think the Chinese empire and expansion is very different in lots of ways from European traditions, but the spread of the Hanization, which is a gradual thing, does mean that all parts of China which have become integrated into China become part of the Chinese family. They speak Mandarin, they have similar customs, festivals, they have similar philosophical systems in Confucianism and Buddhism. They become part of the Chinese family. So Taiwan and Xinjiang and others, although only becoming part of China in the last some hundreds of years, are now Chinese. They are younger brothers. They are arms and legs. And to imagine cutting them off is like cutting off an arm and a leg, or a leg. And it's made much worse by the fact that China has been enormous and very difficult to hold together. And if parts of it start to fall off, then there is a rational fear that this could be contagious, and that all the peripheries would all say, Tibet, for example, or other parts of China might say, well, we want to be independent. So the domino effect is another consideration. But I think it's deeper, which is that they feel really that the Taiwanese, they came from the mainland, they are Chinese, they are part of us, and we don't want to sever this very deep bond. The case of Hong Kong is particularly intriguing because you've got the intersection of the two types or models of empire. You've got the strong British presence for 100 years or more, whereby the British brought their concept of common law and Western democracy towards the end to a certain extent, and British education and language and British business models, so that Hong Kong has a very strong British Empire feeling. It was part of the British Empire for a long time. And so it could represent itself and think of itself as somewhere which, like other parts of the British Empire, should decide what it wants to do. And if it wants to leave Hong Kong, leave China, mainland China, after it leaves Britain, then that's up to it. On the other hand, the origin of almost all the people in Hong Kong and much of its culture and some of its language and much else is Chinese. So you've got a kind of Venn overlap or intersection between the Anglo-Saxon model and the Continental model, and that is inevitably going to lead to misunderstandings, and the Western, the Anglosphere pushes saying, they should be free and they should be like us, and if they want to clear off, let them clear off. And the Chinese saying, no, they are our family. They always have been. For a time you grab them, but they're back with us. And to let them just go off would be to lose a very integral, if no longer so important, economically, part of China. So we are not happy with that idea. So those are some refreshed thoughts on this continuing interesting puzzle of different imperial systems.